welcome to our Thursday night talk for Discover Islam Week. This is the week where we try to tell as many non-Muslims about what Islam really means to us. So tonight's format is we're going to have a talk titled Islam in the UK, which will finish roughly around 7:40. And after that we'll have questions and answers either by hand or by text message, which will bring us up to 8:30 p.m. So our esteemed guest speaker tonight is Sheikh Abdassamad Clarke, and he's going to introduce himself for me.
Well, let's try and rehearse it very quickly. So, can you hear? Easy. Yes. I'll tell you what. I'm really hoping that this will be more of a conversation than a lecture. And by me having a microphone, it kind of tilts the balance. So I am actually used to public speaking, and I will make an effort to project. Maybe you can have that for contribute from the audience. Yeah. But I had the honour to study in Cairo, and we used to pray Jummah regularly in a mosque in Cairo. And I was always impressed by these people, because when we arrived, they had microphones and amplifiers for the Imam and for the Muazzin, and they got rid of them. Because the Muazzin and the Imam used to have the ability to project. So, one of the themes we've been exploring in the Muslim Faculty of Advanced Studies has been technology and technique and how this affects us. And the impact of the microphone and the amplifier is a very good illustration of that. I won't explore that too much just yet. So, to introduce the way I would like to proceed, I'm going to introduce a concept which we developed in Norwich over some years, which we called our symposium, the Muslim Faculty of Advanced Studies Symposium. We developed some guidelines for that. And let me read them out, because they're useful. These symposiums are intended as an antidote to the adversarial mode of dialectical debate that more often than not leaves the participants none the wiser. Instead, we hope to recover the ancient scholastic tradition of interested parties thinking together towards the truth in an atmosphere of convivial discussion. As the moderator for today's discussion, it is my task to push the boat out, and then to keep the conversation on a sound course. Anyone is free to intervene at any stage. Indeed, you are positively encouraged to do so. The only rules being appropriate courtesy at any time, at all times. Remember, we are thinking together towards the truth. We are not here to fight each other, whether we are Muslims or not Muslims, whether we are believers or atheists. We are human beings who are thinking together. Appropriate courtesy at all times. That interventions are made for gaining clarification or with a view to advancement towards the truth, as opposed to dialectical point scoring. One affirms what is true in the previous submission before advancing one's own contribution. One does not invoke the absent they. We don't have an absent they. They are doing this, they want this, they want that. Unless you can name names, we won't use they. I would add that one cannot have recourse to a text, particularly not to invoke it as authority, but only to elucidate some aspect of it that might help the discussion. So we're not going to use texts as authorities to beat each other with. No violence, disorder, or disrespect. I was given the opportunity of either being introduced or introducing myself, and because there are two things. One is that you have a right to know something about me. However much my telling you about that will help or not, I don't know. But some of the details of my biography are very important for where I'm going to start from. And that is that I was born in Northern Ireland. I was born in Northern Ireland. I came to young manhood in the late 60s. I just left Northern Ireland to study when what we call the Troubles broke out. So, Northern Ireland is the last remnants of something that racked Europe for centuries, which was the divide between the Protestant and the Catholics. And we have, as Muslims, we've walked onto a stage. And we have been cast a role in a drama that precedes us. So once you talk about God, you talk about religion, you have to understand the appalling nature of the wars of the Reformation, the terrible bitterness that this caused, and where it has led to. So, because of the terrible bitterness, a third party emerged. And this party was the scientific party, the secular party. It was a people who developed, they were the humanists, they developed a neutral language, because you couldn't talk about God without a fight. It wasn't possible. And so this came into existence, this third party, which has come to be the dominant party in the world today, for many reasons. Later on, the Jews emerged from the ghetto, and they were admitted to this mutual discourse, and we have come in and we are being admitted to it. And because I mentioned Northern Ireland, then because I think the theme, what was the theme I was supposed to talk about?
Islam
In the UK. Okay. So now already we're dealing with these terms, the UK, the United Kingdom. It could have been British Islam or one of these matters. So this is also an effect of the Reformation playing out in Britain. And there were various religious struggles, and an identity was evolved that would encompass things in a neutral way, which was the British identity. And as you know, I'm Irish, so I can also claim an Irish identity. I've also got an Irish passport. So the identity is a fluid matter. So, Ulster, Britain. So, I mean, we as Muslims, we've walked onto a stage and we don't realize the role that we've been handed. In fact, we're reading off a script that doesn't fit us at all. And this is why I've said, we come to Islam too soon. Too soon. All the discourse is immediately about Islam. And then, of course, it's all about Sharia, and you know where all of that goes. So we get there too soon. We have had the great good fortune to have had Ustad Muhammad Iqbal, who lives in Birmingham, and who just quietly teaches classical works of Islam without much controversy or flurry. He doesn't seek out the media, but he's constantly teaching men and women in his house the classical works he's utterly devoted to this knowledge. And he came to us in Norwich. We had what was called the MFAS, the Muslim Faculty of Advanced Studies Residentials, and he was saying that basically for 1,000 years the Muslims were not talking about Islam. It wasn't a topic that they talked about. They talked about Iman. And Iman, in a shorthand, is faith. And it also has a sense of trust. Looking to translate it once, working with a friend on a translation, we found a beautiful definition that Iman is to be true to the trust that God has placed in you. So Iman, which we translate as faith, is to be true. It is to be true. And he was saying during the time when the Muslim community was well, for 1,000 years, this was the topic. This is what the Muslims put forward. They were talking, what is Iman? It's to talk about the nature of existence. What is this existence? What's the meaning of existence? These were the things the Muslims were concerned about. Not about stoning. You had to go through a whole process to get to jihad. But we get to these things too soon. And similarly, he said if you go through, he said they have in Morocco, in the Qarawiyyin, they have the syllabuses going back for a long, long time. What subject do you not find being studied in the Qarawiyyin? You never find it. Sharia. There wasn't actually a topic. There wasn't a subject called Sharia. There was fiqh. There was aqidah. There was things, but this word Sharia didn't have the emphasis it does now. We all of us now equate Sharia with Islamic law. Sharia is a body of water in the desert, and it's also the way to the water. So it's intrinsically something to do with nourishment. So, where was it? Ulster, we got to Britain.
You're talking about a gentleman from Birmingham.
That's right, thank you. So, Ustad Muhammad Iqbal, if you can, some of you are from Birmingham, I think one of the people picked me up. Was that you? Do you know Muhammad Iqbal? Let me recommend him. It's too high. There's somebody who's in love with knowledge. He's intoxicating to be with. You get the passion, the excitement. He's not going to beat you right in the head with a fatwa. I'm not sure how many are not Muslims here now. I don't want to exclude anybody by speaking a special language or Arabic too much, so please interrupt if something's not clear. Anybody at any time. Because the more interactive it is, the more interesting it will be. We come to Islam too soon. We have all come here to this meeting for knowledge. I think we all had some intention to, I'm not saying that you thought I would give you knowledge, that would be arrogant of me to think so. But there is something in us that brought us here, I think, to know more, to increase in our knowing. I've got little bits and pieces, you see, that I was hoping to frame this around. And one thing is a hadith. Does everybody know what a hadith is? Hadith is a tradition ascribed to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And it's not the Quran. The Muslims will be very, very careful to distinguish it from the Quran. There was a famous wali or a saint in Morocco called Abdassamad Clarke, who was completely illiterate. And people used to test him on his knowledge. And they would go to him and cite text to him, and he would say, that's Quran. That is hadith. oral tradition of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and then he'll say, this is what's called a hadith Qudsi, which is something narrated by the Prophet, peace be upon him, in which God speaks. And they said, how do you know? Because you've never studied. And he says, because Quran has a light, Hadith has a light, but it's not the same as the light of the Quran. And the Hadith in which the divine speaks in the first person have a light, but it's not the same as the light of the Hadith, and it's not the same as the light of the Quran. So this is a Hadith germane to our wanting to know. And the short version is Husnul Su'al Nisful Ilm, which is a good question is a half of knowledge. A good question is a half of knowledge. But there's a lot in it when you begin to unwrap the Arabic, because husn is good, but it's got the sense of beauty. It's got the sense of beauty in it. Because goodness and beauty are the same thing. And su'al, which is a substantive meaning question, is actually what is called a verbal noun. So it means questioning. Questioning. Because if you think of a good question, then you're thinking of a kind of a square way of looking at things, whereby there's somebody who's got some knowledge, you ask him a question, he gives you the answer, and you say, thank you very much, and you go away. Which is, in fact, a relatively trivial thing. It's not a very deep thing to ask a question and get an answer. This husnul su'al, this good questioning, which is a half of knowledge, is another thing. It's a deeper matter. Sometimes it's important not to get the answer. Sometimes the question is more important than the answer. Because when you get the answer, that sense of inquiry and search and investigation leaves. And you shut it down. Oh, well, there's the answer. So, this is something I hope we would keep open here in this gathering. We keep open this sense of good and beautiful questioning. The complete hadith, there are two versions of it. الاقتصاد في النفقة نصف المعيشة والتودد إلى الناس نصف العقل وحسن السؤال نصف العلم. Moderation in expenditure is a half of your livelihood. Amiable, good character towards people is a half of intellect. And a good questioning is a half of knowledge. So the question I wanted to start with is one which comes from Leibniz. Do you know Leibniz?
Yes.
So, who was Leibniz?
The mathematician.
Mathematician? He was an extraordinary man. He was a vast man. He was a philosopher, mathematician. Leibniz has a book called The Monadology, and that everybody was thinking of atoms in his time, and Leibniz had an alternative conception of the atom as not being conscious, but of a kind of awareness. These were the moments. So the very basis of matter, in his view, had the first elements of life and awareness. So he's an interesting man. He was basically a statesman, historian. So he's a deep man. And this question of his comes to us through Martin Heidegger. It's very well known that Martin Heidegger wrote a book called Introduction to Metaphysics. Do you know Martin Heidegger? Have you come across it? So Martin Heidegger wasn't a Muslim, but my teacher, Sheikh Abdul Sufi, said he came to the doors of Tawheed. In fact, he didn't come through. But Tawheed, again, for those not familiar with the term, is the unitary science. The unitary science of divine unity. So Martin Heidegger opens his book on the introduction to metaphysics with what he says is the first question. It's the first question, which is, why is there something rather than nothing at all? Why is there something rather than nothing at all? Now, theologically, we're quick to supply the answer, but actually the question is very interesting, because there didn't have to be anything. So I'll leave that to you, because I have found this a nourishing reflection in my hours alone. Why is there something rather than nothing? But if you then say there is something because the divine willed it to be, then you ask the question again, why? These, again, it's not something that we want an answer for, but it's a good question. It's a good question. And Allah, in his book, in the Quran, answers that. Who knows what the answer? I'm sure someone knows.
We have not created you except for you to worship me.
Yes. Yes. So Allah says in translation, we have not created jinn, or the unseen beings, and mankind except to worship me. And when you go into the commentary literature, that's very important for the Quran, you find, I don't know who knows, it's a very famous explanation of this word, worship me. God says, I only created jinn and mankind to worship me. Do you know what the classical commentary of that is? To know me, yes? So in Arabic it's yarifun, that we are created to know God. But the word yarifun is a very particular word. What's the other word for knowledge in Arabic? Ilm, yes? So ilm is much more associated with the sciences and the classical disciplines. And ma'arifa has different senses. It can be used differently by the scholars of Creed, and we'll return to that in a second, and by the Sufis. But the word itself is used Quranically in where Allah says, يَعْرِفُونَهُ كَمَا يَعْرِفُونَ أَبْنَاءَهُم. He's talking about recognition that people have, where, and I've translated the word, ma'arifa is to do with a recognition. And he says that they know him, possibly the Prophet ﷺ or the Quran, they recognize it. They recognize him or the Quran as they recognize their own children. So it's a recognition. You have recognition of something you already knew. You have recognition of something you already knew. Theology is an approach to something you don't know. This ma'arifa is to do with what you do know, and it's your lost heritage. It's something you've lost. I see wrinkles and brows. Are you following me? Is that all right? It's the same with the foundational Arabic word dhikr. It's a Quranic word dhikr, which means, who knows what dhikr means?
Remembrance.
Remembrance and does mean remembrance, absolutely. It's remember, to remember. But what else?
Praise. Glorify.
It's not praise. What is praise in Arabic?
Ham.
Hamd. So what is dhikr? Like today, in ordinary spoken Arabic, dhikr is also, it is remembrance, but it's also mention, exactly. So it's mention. So this is a foundational Quranic term, and it is the mention, and it's the remembrance, and it is said that the lowest example of dhikr is mention on the tongue. The next highest is remembrance in the heart, and the highest dhikr is mention on the tongue with the remembrance in the heart. So, but you remember something you've known. You remember what you've already known, but you've forgotten. What's the Arabic word for human being? Insan. And what is the root of insan? Nisyan. One of two roots, actually. It's very interesting. Yes? So, insan people either say it's from nasiya or anisa. Yes? Nasiya is he forgot. He forgot. Human being is called human being because he forgot. Yeah? Summiya al-insanu li'annahu nasi. He was called a human being because he forgot. Then anisa is the other possible route. And anisa is to do with being convivial, social, amiable. That somehow we're intrinsically, that's what the human being is. So, how did I get there?
Leibniz's question.
Leibniz's question. The Quranic answer. So, Allah created us to know Him. So, in one way we skirted the word belief, because I know for myself, as someone of a Christian background, I recoil from religion. I still recoil from the word God. I recoil from the church. I recoil from religious ritual. I definitely didn't become a Muslim to import that into Islam. The Muslims I met didn't have that. They didn't have that. So the word belief, even though belief is actually one of the translations of the word iman, nevertheless it's a single dimension of it. And the word belief, as the history of religion in Europe has given us good reason to be very careful about these words. So Allah created us to know Him. To know Him. We had a conversation. I've forgotten your name.
Hamza. Hamza.
Hamza. Sorry, Hamza. Because Hamza and I share the background in science, physics. And we were talking about that before I came, and I was saying that Hamza has to read Werner Heisenberg. Because Werner Heisenberg is a good introduction to it. I would say that this was one of the key, that physics was one of the key things that brought me to become a Muslim. And Hamza was saying how he's troubled by the meaninglessness of quantum theory. And
as it's taught, it's divorced from philosophy.
Divorced from philosophy, yes. And so Heisenberg is a fascinating thinker and a deep man, a very deep man. And his biography is fascinating. There's a playwright called Richard Frame who wrote a play called Copenhagen. If you want a very good introduction to who Heisenberg and Niels Bohr were and a rundown in quantum theory, it's really a masterpiece as a play. It's quite an astonishing one. But you need to know a little bit about the biography beforehand of what was happening. And Heisenberg came to Copenhagen after the Second World War to meet up again with Niels Bohr, and he was accompanied by another quantum physicist called Wolfgang Pauli. And one of the things you have to remember I talked about this neutral language that was evolved in Europe. And one of the things you must remember is that science was like a great international brotherhood. It was an extraordinary thing before the Second World War. The scientists, you can't really say who made the key discoveries, because it was such a brotherhood of people making these discoveries, and they were genuinely concerned to know. They were quite admirable people. Now scientists want to know if they can patent it. You see, there's a geneticist called Richard Lewontin, who's a good geneticist, a very interesting man, a thorough man. But he said, there's no genetic biologist of my acquaintance who hasn't got shares in a pharmaceutical company. Everybody is out for the patent. If they're not out for the patent, they're out for the Nobel Prize. Have you seen there's a very good documentary about the Higgs boson. And you see that people are troubled about, am I going to get the Nobel Peace Prize? It's very sad, really. So, before the Second World War, the physicists, scientists were an international brotherhood of truth seekers, really. They were quite movingly genuine in what they were doing. But the war politicized everything. The people who stayed in Germany, like Heisenberg who stayed in Germany, they were all, a shadow hung over them for the rest of their careers. And it's never left Heisenberg. And his deep relationship with Niels Bohr was shattered, because Niels Bohr was a Dane, and the Germans occupied Denmark, and the trust between them was shattered. Nevertheless, they met in 1953, and there was something of the old spirit, and there's a conversation, and Heisenberg has an essay that he wrote, which is a very good piece of essay writing about this encounter. And after meeting with Niels Bohr, and Niels Bohr telling them about the logical positivists who came from Vienna, and all of them agreeing that the logical positivists were utterly the most shallow people they'd ever heard of, because Bohr said they were not reeling with shock, because they asked Niels Bohr for an explanation of quantum physics, and he gave them a lecture, and they said, thank you very much, and went away. He said they didn't understand anything, because they were not reeling with shock. They were devastated. Later, in the evening, Heisenberg and Wolfgang Pauli, they go for a walk in Copenhagen in an area called the Lange Linie, which is a walk by the water which goes down to where the Little Mermaid is. And suddenly Pauli turns to Heisenberg and says, come on, Heisenberg, do you believe in a personal God? Do you believe in a personal God? And Heisenberg, being a very careful German professor, he says, if you would allow me to rephrase your question this way, do I believe in a central order of existence that you can know as you know your own soul? And he says, and I use the word soul deliberately so as not to be misunderstood. If you ask me, do I believe in a central order of existence that you can know as you know your own soul, then I would have to say yes. Werner Heisenberg. Now he's trying very deliberately, not to put it in a Christian language. Do you see how much effort he's put into being careful not to put it in a religious language? But you see the meaning of what he's saying. And then he said, and because maybe my opinion is not so interesting, then you all know Pascal. He says, you know Pascal. When did Pascal live exactly? He's not medieval, is he?
1800s.
Sorry?
17th century.
It's the 17th century. So, Pascal, when he died, they found sewn into his jacket a piece of paper. Written on it was this thing in Pascal's own handwriting. It said, "Fire, God of the prophets Abraham and Isaac, not of the philosophers and the theologians." This was something important that he had sewn into his jacket and kept close to his heart. Nobody's intervening, I'm really worried.
Should we ask the question again? Why is there something rather than nothing?
Why is there something rather than nothing?
Responses.
Well, Allah's already answered it. So the why is the human being. Why is the human being? It's created for knowledge. Created to know Allah. I still have an uneasiness of this history of Europe. This, how God, I've made a note for myself. I said God became the top of a hierarchy, a political hierarchy, the church. You know, when the Normans took England, they had a twofold political strategy. One was castles, and the other was churches and cathedrals. So the church was basically a wing of their political power. Very powerful part of it. So they had a sword and they had a church. So there's a reason why we don't start with God. So how do we start? What is our starting point? As I said, we get to Islam too soon. Now we're getting to Islam. People. How does Islam start? What, in one word, what is it?
What's the purpose of anything?
You give me a translation of Islam, which we'll leave for the moment, but how does it start?
Revelation.
Revelation, yes.
Remembrance. Remembrance.
Remembrance. I want to, like, one Arabic word.
La.
La. So, the means?
No.
No. La ilaha.
Illa.
No. La ilaha.
Yeah.
Translate.
Oh, and no God.
No God.
La.
La ilaha.
Ilaha. Yeah.
Illa. Except, but also, but. Allah. And Allah is the best thing I've seen is that the name Allah is the name of the essence, and for those who don't know Arabic, al is the definite article, it's the. But in the name Allah, the clearest thing that I've seen is that the al is not the definite article. Some of the linguists, of the Muslim linguists, say that it's an abridgment of al-ilah, that was run together, and that it means the God. But the strongest opinion that I've found is that it is uniquely 4 letters that designate the divine. It's a name. It's a proper name. In fact, I find this from two sources. It's called Ismun Jamid Mortajil. Who's studying Arabic here? So Jamid, what's a Jamid?
Something that is stable, not moving.
Yes, but grammatically, as a grammatical term?
It cannot be made male or female, for example.
I think so. Jamid is a substantive. In grammatical terms, it's a substantive. So it could be a male or a female, as far as I know. But the word mortajil, the translation is surprising. It's extemporaneous. Extemporaneous. Now, if you don't understand what that means, I don't blame you, because I had to look for the meaning as an English word. But you can hear tem, which is time. Yeah? Ex out of. And it's almost like it's an exclamation. It's not. It's got this exclamatory quality. So no God but Allah. And the word illa can mean except, as in this statement. They can also begin a sentence, in which case it would be like, however. Illa can have both these uses. So no God, which is useful because I grew up in the church. I sang in the cathedral choir. I grew up in that. But the concept we had of God wasn't one for an intelligent being. That's not to say that Christian theology doesn't have more sophisticated teachings, but the common understanding was a barrier to us. So, having said we come to Islam too soon, we've come to Islam. We've come to the beginning. La ilaha illallah. Now I'd like you to, yes?
One question. Is there any difference between the meaning of God and the meaning of Allah? Is there any difference between?
Well, the answer is yes and no. Yes and no. So, most natural people, until recently, and I'm from Ireland. In fact, there's particularly in the Republic, there's a more natural connection to religion among people, and so I've little doubt that people, when they say God, they mean what I mean.
I think God or goddess, so in terms of gender, was Allah
Yes.
genderless.
Yes. And also, so yes and no. So God can have a gender, and it can have a plural. God can have a plural.
Gods.
And nevertheless, Allah tells us in Quran, to say to the people of the book, to the Jews and the Christians, Ilahukum wa ilahuna ilahun wahid. Your God and our God is one God. So we have to say yes, God is the same. But because I don't know if the people who are from a Christian background, you have the same experience with Muhammad. How alien religion appeared to us when we were not Muslim.
Yeah, certainly from the Catholic.
The Catholics. Yes. I can't draw you out.